All right, welcome back to the channel. Errol Spence trainer Derek James says that this whole corona thing that's going on could very well shut down and eliminate any money that could be there, or not any money, the necessary money in the boxing ecosystem to make the Terence Crawford versus Errol Spence Jr. fight. A discussion of this topic, I think, is important at this point in time because it will also relate to what you can expect from boxing and the type of fights that take place when you return. And I think that it might actually be a good thing. Let's talk about that in this video. All right, welcome back to the channel. So Derek James, who's the trainer for Errol Spence Jr., backed up some comments that he had, or took some comments that he made earlier, maybe about a month ago, took it a little bit further in talking about the fight between Errol Spence Jr. and Terence Crawford and the financial hurdles that exist for that fight. And because before he was talking largely about what transpired with Terence Crawford as far as his, what his pay-per-view numbers were, and how basically the popularity and the financial viability of the fight based on what Terence Crawford brings to the table, right? The number of pay-per-views he's had, the number of views he gets, the number of, the ticket sales, those type of things. Now, previously, Derek James said that is a problem for making the fight with Errol Spence Jr. because Terence Crawford is going to want to make a certain amount of money, and Errol Spence Jr. is going to want to make a certain amount of money. The networks are going to need want to make a certain amount of money. The promoter, Bob Arum, and the PBC executives that are involved, that they're all going to want to get paid off of this fight. And Terence Crawford's popularity and specifically his numbers on pay-per-view don't really equate or add up right now in order to make that fight financially viable. That's what he said before, but now he doubles down on it and brings up the fact that since we've been in a quarantine situation for about 2 months, we might and are going to be in one for the foreseeable future. Like, I'm looking at the news wondering, like, man, I'm waiting for somebody to say vaccine. You know what I mean? Until we get to vaccine stage, it's all up in the air. And there's been a lot of people who are going without work, whose incomes have been seriously hit. And as a result, at least what Derek James is saying could be the case is that would affect, and I think is reasonable, it would affect their ability to pay for pay-per-view fights. When the boxing is opened up again and crowds are able to watch fights, it'll affect their ability to pay, pay for tickets, pay for the airfare necessary to go to the fight, all of that type of stuff, right? Because people have lost a lot of their discretionary income or disposable discretionary income. And boxing, by and large, falls into that category, right? It's not a necessity like your rent, or your mortgage, or your car note, or your health insurance bill, or your groceries, your phone. Those things are essential. Things like going to getting a pay-per-view fight. That's discretionary, and you should pay for it with disposable income. And what he's saying is that in that situation. In the situation we find ourselves in, that might not be the case. That's something else that Bob Arum has stated several times. Even though I think Bob Arum is laying it on a little thick because I think he's got another reason why he's doing it. I think he wants to drive down the price of fighters, period, because of the purses that fighters are getting paid, period, because he never wanted them to get that high to begin with. He was kind of forced to lift the amount of money that he was paying, or increase the amount of money he was paying because of the setup with the PBC. Same thing for Matchroom Boxing. Matchroom Boxing and these guys and these promoters don't want to pay these fighters the money that they've been paying them over the last several years. They thought that Al Heyman and the PBC were going to go bankrupt paying the fighters the money that they were paying. They So the idea that that boxing could return to a time where boxers made significantly less guaranteed money, man, please, Bob Arum would jump on that in a heartbeat. So would Bob Arum. And I think I haven't heard Eddie Hearn talk about it, but I have heard Bob Arum mention it enough where I start thinking, yeah, there is some truth to that. Clearly there's truth to that. But at the same time, that's something you want to occur, and I doubt that you're going to go back if the situation alleviated itself. I doubt Bob Arum would then go back to raising those deals again. But I got a specific video talking about that's coming up later today. I think that you'll enjoy it. Definitely, keep your lookout out for it. But that's what Derek James, that's generally speaking, that's what Derek James is saying. That's what he's hinting at. And I think that is very, very viable. And that boxers will get hit in the pocket during the return. But what I don't necessarily think that is a bad thing. Now, as far as the Terence Crawford and Errol Spence Jr. fight goes, I think that there's things other than the purses that are standing in the way of that fight. And it's because I ain't just, I respect Bob Arum, and honestly, man, I learned a lot. I've learned a lot from Bob Arum, man, just the way that he moves, because he's been around a long time, and he's the top guy. He's the top promoter as far as experience, understanding, and know-how in the world. I don't think that there's much of a question about that, other than him and Don King. So I learned a lot watching how he moves and how he handles certain fighters in certain circumstances. And it's like, being in my profession, I can almost see the agreements just on the basis of the way that he behaves. I can almost see the agreements and how they're written based on how he behaves. And so anyway, I do believe that he's going to try to push those salaries back down, but it can wind up being a good thing for for boxing fans, because that could mean, that you actually get more fights and better fights out of the fighters that are fighting. So take, for example, you have a fight with, like Terence Crawford, and I'm not trying to hate on Terence Crawford here at all. I'm just using Terence Crawford as an example because we're staying with the Bob Arum, Bob Arum, and that's actually the topic of the video, is the Terence Crawford fight. So take, for example, if Terence Crawford was making, I don't know, $3 million a fight, right? $3 million a fight. And now but he's making $3 million for Igis Kalvinakis, and he's making $3 million for Jose Benavidez, right? Now, imagine that he cannot make $3 million fighting those guys, that he could make $5 million. He has to make $5 million fighting Sean Porter, or he has to make, in order to make $5 million, he has to have the magnitude of a fight with Danny Garcia. That would press him to press Bob Arum to get him bigger fights that will allow him to make that money. Because right now, above a certain threshold, right? Like, there was a guy that was I can't remember the name of the guy that did it, but he said that I think it might have been Vanderbilt. He said something like, I'm worth, $100 million. But there's no practical difference between my life and the life of a guy that makes $10 million. That's what he said. And this is something, back in the 30s. He said, I make $100 million, but you can't tell, practically speaking, there's no difference between my life and the guy that makes $10 million, because we both have everything that we need with the money that we have. So when you're paying somebody $3 million to fight somebody that is a subpar opponent, but they can make $3 million fighting them, it's hard. You're going to be hard pressed to get him to fight a better competition guy for $5 million, because his risk reward says, well, why would I fight the really hard fight for just $2 million more when I can take two subpar fights and make $1 million more than I would have if I had taken the tough fight, and I know I'm not at any risk of losing. And the tough fight, the tough big money fight doesn't go away. In order to get me to come up off fighting these regular $3 million fights, you're going to have to get me, 10 million. You're going to have to make it worth 3 fights to me for me to do that. So that right there could basically, when fighters have that type of money, which is, I think is a good thing from the fighter's perspective, it's a great thing. For looking at it from that perspective, it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough to get them to make the very, very big fights. Also, if some of the money leaves from the sport of boxing in, as far as like the gates and all that, I guess in this circumstance, the gate has to be there, but it could also, force a situation where Top Rank and these guys, in order to get the discretionary income out of fighters, have to make big fights. And they can't have like 6-7 months of fights like that you just don't want to see, that you just don't care about. It also could push money into some of the more premier divisions and take some of the time slots away from like the little itty bitty guys that people in the United States really don't care much about. So, it's going to be interesting to see how this thing plays out. I think Derek James had an interesting point. I know that everything at the end of the day is going to pan out and it's going to work for everybody because, hey, man, a little less than $3 million a fight ain't that bad. And I wouldn't mind it if it winds up in a situation where I, as the fan, get more out of the money that I'm spending than I did previously. But you let me know what you think in the comment section. And with that, I'm out. Peace.